Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we delve into the vast expanse of human experience, uncovering the intricacies of the past and their profound impact on our present. Today, we embark on a fascinating journey through the twilight years of a behemoth as we explore the decline of the Soviet Union. This epic tale of rise and fall, of ideological fervor and economic strain, is a testament to the complexities of human nature and the unpredictable trajectory of history. As we set out on this narrative, let us first gaze upon the sprawling landscape of the Soviet Union in its prime, a vast territorial entity born from the ashes of revolution and nurtured by the ideals of Marxism, Leninism. The early 20th century saw the Soviet Union emerge as a global superpower, its influence stretching across continents, its ideology captivating the imagination of millions. Yet, beneath the surface of this formidable empire, seeds of discontent and structural flaws were sown, awaiting the catalysts that would set in motion the irreversible process of decline. Our story begins in the aftermath of World War II, where the Soviet Union, under the stalwart leadership of Joseph Stalin, stood victorious but scarred. The war had exacted a tremendous toll on the Soviet populace and economy, with millions dead, cities lay in ruins, and industrial production severely crippled. Stalin's response was a mix of brutal suppression and frenzied industrialization, aiming to rapidly rebuild and strengthen the Soviet Union. His rule, marked by terror and paranoia, saw the execution and imprisonment of countless individuals deemed enemies of the state, creating an atmosphere of fear that permeated every level of Soviet society. The death of Stalin in 1953 brought about a period of cautious reform under Nikita Khrushchev, who sought to de-Stalinize the Soviet Union and introduce elements of liberalization. Khrushchev's policies, including the Virgin Lands campaign aimed at increasing agricultural production, and his efforts to decentralize power, were ambitious but often flawed in their execution. His rule was marked by significant events, such as the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, which the Soviets brutally suppressed, demonstrating the limits of reform within the Soviet bloc. The ousting of Khrushchev in 1964 led to the ascension of Leonid Brezhnev, whose tenure would be characterized by stagnation and consolidation. The Brezhnev era saw a decline in economic growth rates, corruption becoming endemic, and a widening gap between the Soviet elite and the general populace. Internationally, the Soviet Union became increasingly embroiled in Cold War rivalries, notably the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968 to quell the Prague Spring, and the ill-fated adventure in Afghanistan beginning in 1979. As the 1980s dawned, the Soviet Union found itself facing mounting internal and external challenges. The economy was sluggish, oil prices had dropped, significantly reducing Soviet revenue, and dissent within the Eastern European satellite states was on the rise. It was against this backdrop that Mikhail Gorbachev emerged as General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985, determined to reform the Soviet system through policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika restructuring. Gorbachev's reforms, aimed at revitalizing the Soviet economy and increasing transparency, were initially met with optimism, both domestically and internationally. As Gorbachev's reforms began to take hold, the Soviet Union witnessed a surge in political and social activism, with various groups and individuals seizing upon the newfound openness to express long-suppressed sentiments. The year 1986 marked a significant turning point, as Gorbachev introduced the concept of glasnost at the 27th Congress of the Communist Party, emphasizing the need for transparency and democratization within Soviet society. This call to action was met with enthusiasm by many, including the likes of Andrei Sakharov, a renowned physicist and dissident who had been exiled to Gorky in 1980 for his vocal criticism of the Soviet regime. Sakharov's return to Moscow in December 1986, following his release from exile, symbolized the shifting landscape of Soviet politics. His subsequent election to the Congress of People's Deputies in 1989, where he became a leading voice for reform, underscored the growing influence of liberal forces within the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster on April 26, 1986, had exposed the darker underbelly of Soviet secrecy and mismanagement, as the government's initial attempts to conceal the catastrophe only served to further erode public trust. The Soviet Union's grip on Eastern Europe began to loosen in the late 1980s as Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika emboldened reformers across the region. The Polish trade union Solidarity, led by Lech Walesa, had been a thorn in the side of the Soviet-backed government since its founding in 1980. By 1989, Solidarity was poised to capitalize on the shifting winds, as Poland became the first Eastern European country to hold free elections, paving the way for the eventual collapse of communist regimes across the region. As the Berlin Wall came tumbling down on November 9, 1989, the Soviet Union's control over its Eastern European satellites began to unravel at an unprecedented pace. The following year witnessed a cascade of events that would forever alter the course of Soviet history. Lithuania declared independence on March 11, 1990. Latvia and Estonia soon followed suit, and by the summer of 1990, the Soviet government was faced with the daunting prospect of managing a rapidly disintegrating empire. In a last-ditch effort to stem the tide of reform, hardline communist leaders within the Soviet Union began to mobilize against Gorbachev. The formation of the Interregional Deputies Group in June 1989, which included prominent figures such as Boris Yeltsin and Sakharov, had provided a powerful platform for liberal forces to challenge the authority of the Communist Party. As tensions escalated, Gorbachev found himself increasingly isolated, struggling to maintain a delicate balance between reformers and hardliners. The failed coup attempt of August 1991, in which a group of communist hardliners sought to overthrow Gorbachev, marked a decisive turning point in the decline of the Soviet Union. With Yeltsin, now president of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, rallying opposition to the coup from atop a tank outside the Russian White House, the tide of history had irrevocably shifted against the Soviet regime. As the dust settled, Gorbachev's resignation on December 25, 1991, and the formal dissolution of the Soviet Union on the same day, brought an end to the long and tumultuous saga of the Soviet experiment. As the Soviet Union dissolved, the newly independent states faced significant challenges in establishing their own governments, economies, and identities. The Russian Federation, led by Boris Yeltsin, struggled to come to terms with its new role as a regional power rather than a superpower. The economic transition was particularly tumultuous, with hyperinflation, poverty, and inequality soaring in the early 1990s. As the Russian economist Grigory Yavlinsky aptly described it, the Soviet Union was destroyed, but the new Russia was not yet born. In the years that followed, the legacy of the Soviet Union continued to shape the region. The Baltic states, having declared independence in 1990, worked to reintegrate into the European community, while Ukraine and Belarus struggled with their own identities, torn between their historical ties to Russia and their desire for independence. The Caucasus region, meanwhile, descended into conflict, as Armenia and Azerbaijan clashed over Nagorno-Karabakh, and Georgia struggled to maintain control over its own territories. As the years passed, the world began to reflect on the significance of the Soviet Union's collapse. Historians and scholars pointed to the decline of the Soviet Union as a watershed moment in modern history, marking the end of the Cold War and the dawn of a new era of global politics. As the historian Stephen Kotkin noted, the Soviet Union's demise was not just a Russian event, but a world event with far-reaching consequences for international relations, global security, and the future of communism. Today, the decline of the Soviet Union is remembered as a testament to the power of human freedom and the failure of authoritarian regimes. The bravery of dissidents like Andrei Sakharov, the determination of reformers like Mikhail Gorbachev, and the resilience of ordinary citizens who endured decades of repression are all celebrated as heroes of a struggle that changed the course of history. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.